And what were they doing? So, these Indian ships at least were a part of a, so I described right in the beginning the Bronze Age, 5,000 years ago kind of situation, where they were basically trading between Gujarat and the Persian Gulf area. But certainly by 1000, which is 3,000 years later, the Indians had certainly mastered much of the Indian Ocean region. They were sailing everywhere. They knew by now that the monsoon winds could be used to go back and forth. So one of the things about the monsoon winds, which is unique, is that it flows in one direction for part of the year and exactly in the opposite direction for the other part of the year. Why this is important is because it allows you to go out and then use the winds to come back in the course of 1 year. So using that, they were sailing, and they were not just sailing into this direction, which is westward, they were also sailing eastward. And so they were a very important part of a trading system which went from the Red Sea, where there was so at different points obviously there were different empires, but I'm now describing the world, say, of 1000 AD. So that's 1000 years ago. They were basically sailing between the ports of the Fatimids, who were running an empire in what is now Egypt, and were at that time the biggest power in the Middle East. Interestingly, they were a Shiite kingdom. So we tend to not associate Egypt with Shiism, but that was what it was. And then they sailed down the Red Sea out to Socotra, or what the Indians call Dvipasudhara, or the island of bliss. And from then, some of them would sail up north towards Muscat and out again towards Gujarat, but the bulk of them were sailing out towards actually southern India, where there was a huge port in a place called Muzaris, or what the Indians call Muncheripatnam. From then they would go the other side and sail out. So some would sail around Sri Lanka, or they would just use the land route across to the eastern coast. And from there they would sail out to Indonesia and further out. There were two routes you could take. One is through the Malacca Straits, which is between Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula. Or you could use the Sunda Straits, which was further south, between the between Java and Sumatra. And then they were sailing out towards the Mekong Delta, which is now Cambodia and Vietnam, and then up the coast all the way through to China, Japan, Korea, and so on. And there was huge amount of trade going back and forth. It's not small trade. So if you read Korean history, for example, Korean history, as it is taught to their schools, begins with the marriage of a local prince to a princess from Ayodhya, which is in North Central India. Yeah. So there was royal linkages even at that point in time. And there are remains of large Hindu temples along the Chinese coast. So, there was a huge amount of trade going back and forth, and the impact of that is still there. The largest Hindu temple in the world is not in India, it's actually in Cambodia, it's Angkor Wat. So there is a huge amount of trade going back and forth. So in India, the southern India at that point was controlled by an empire called the Chola Empire. And then they went through, in Sumatra there was an empire called the Srivijaya, and all the way through to the Song Empire, which was in China. And they were trading back and forth. In fact, one of the interesting things that happens in all of this is, at some point in time, the Javans and the Srivijaya and the Sumatrans have a war, and in which the Javans win, and they push the Sumatrans out. In which case, what the Sumatrans do, they ask for help from the Chinese. So, with the help of the Chinese,